Окей, привет, ребята. У меня сначала будет небольшая сессия Q&A к вам. Первый вопрос. Есть ли в зале кто-то, кому было бы некомфортно слушать этот доклад на английском? Окей, great. Okay, great. And the next question would be, who never really heard about web components here? Okay, that's great. We are on the same page here. And who already fed up with this topic and the amount of hype around it? Okay, at least one. I was hoping that there are going to be like at least 10 people here. Okay, so web components and what kind of flows they have in 2019. In the beginning, let's uh, let's find out a bit more about each other. So I work at Namecheap. I have like I think 10 years in IT sphere for now. Started using GS since like MooTools. Is there anyone here who used MooTools or at least remember MooTools? Okay. You guys are awesome. That was like good era before frameworks. Okay. So yeah, and a little bit about the company itself. They actually like the reason why I'm standing here, because being here is a part of my like daily work. So we are at Namecheap trying to open the door for everyone to a free and open internet. That means that we are providing services that help people to get online, to get their small business online by providing like everything they could potentially need. It would be like domains, sales certificates, hosting, whatever. And we are like really believe in a free internet, an open one. So we are standing like against laws like SOPA, PIPA, and supporting Electronic Frontiers Foundation. So check out this company. Unfortunately, they are not so like known in Ukraine. Maybe it may be useful for you. So, like how this topic like started for me. So we at Namecheap we have a use case. We have our own design system that aims to provide consistent UI components to all the teams we have in a company. And those teams, they use different frameworks and different technologies. So the goal for the design system is to be technology agnostic, and like every component should work exactly like as it was designed in like every environment it could be deployed, right? So currently we have an approach that forces us to write vanilla JavaScript with no libraries or frameworks. And it's like quite complex approach that uses like abstractions to write business logic, and after that we implement adapters to integrate that business logic with each framework we use in a company. So at some point we said like, whoa, there is web components on the market. Let's try to see if they could be helpful for us. So we analyzed the following points. So we analyzed web components as technology from the standpoint of browser support, frameworks compatibility, will they affect server-side rendering for us, which we use internally, and will we have any SEO impact, styling, accessibility, because we aim to provide accessible website. We are not there yet, but we are like trying to be there. And versioning, because we have multiple teams and multiple versions of the same component can be deployed simultaneously on a page. And of course, like delivery, choose one of the solutions and build some integration paths. So yeah, and let's do a very quick refresh of the subject, right? Because from what I heard, everyone is already familiar with web components, right? So what web components are? So web components allow us to extend HTML5 element set and build our own elements that would work in every browser natively without any additional libraries. So we need only the code of the component itself, right? And this is great because we can take all the behavior of the component, all the HTML of the component, styles of the component, wrap it in a single file, and deliver it to the front end. So on a page, we will be able to use just a single tag, like as we would use like any of the native tags on a web page, right? Like inputs, selects, buttons, whatever. And in the beginning, since this talk will be mostly about the flows of the web components, I want to make like clear statement that I'm not trying to say that they are not ready for production. I'm not trying to say that like stay like away from this technology. I'm just trying to tell you what are the flows we discovered and what are the ways to fight those flows. So web components as technology, they already work in all modern browsers. And the situation will be even better with the release of Chromium-based Edge. They already used by several major companies, and you can even develop mobile applications with them because Ionic 4 currently heavily uses web components. They invested a lot into web components as technology and even built their own compiler for web components. So, but of course, as every more or less young technology, they are not perfect, right? So let's see what are the weaknesses they have. Okay, so the first, I would say this is like a class of weaknesses. It's growth problems. And the first problem of this class is the young ecosystem. So web components as technology, they are in active development for like 5 years already or something. And they went a long path from V0 specification to V1 with some major changes in it. So like, I'm not sure if anyone here remembers HTML imports. There was like quite a lot of hype around that, and like hopefully we are now like, we got rid of it, right? And we have only ES modules. So, and of course, those like changes, quite radical ones, they impacted the ecosystem. So the relevant technologies that you can use nowadays, most of them, like development of those libraries and tools started just like a year ago, and they are still quite young. You can use them, but like be ready that documentation will be imperfect, that some of them may like die at some point, or the community will be not as big as you might expect, right? For example, for big frameworks or well-known libraries. So, for example, Stencil, this is actually the tool that was created by Ionic team. They recently released 1.0 version. It was released just a few months ago. And they still have quite low adoption. The technology is great, but the documentation isn't quite perfect. There is like a lot of things to do there. Hopefully they have a really helpful community where you can find an answers for your questions. The another example would be a lit element. This is a library from guys from the Polymer project. So this is kind of a reincarnation of the Polymer in a smaller like variant. And it was again started just a year ago. And for example, their roadmap was released just 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks before, there was even no roadmap like that is publicly available for lit element and Polymer project itself. And the last but not least example is the support of the web components in React. So this is, I think now it's the only major framework that has compatibility issues because of the nature of React, because it doesn't really uses web APIs in terms of events, for example. So you can use web components with React, but for like complex cases, for complex scenarios, if you, for example, want to pass complex object from React to the web component and backward, you would need wrapper. Hopefully, that wrapper can be like a universal and apply it for all of your web components. And they have pretty like a lot of the information how this can be achieved. So the next point in this class, this is the browser support. So remember I was talking about the good browser support? So yeah, it's good, but every browser that supports web components nowadays has an issues around web components. I would say you would find like an average like from 20 to 60 issues for every browser engine. And like good for us that libraries that you would likely use, they cover those gaps like in 90%, but unfortunately, especially in a big project, you should be ready to get really familiar with those issues and like maybe even contribute to the libraries or wait for the updates from the browser side. It's mostly minor issues, but you should be aware of them. So, and the next example of the youngness of the technology is the coming specs. So there are going to be at least 4 coming specs to the web components that would simplify development and use of the components and would increase flexibility of the technology. So we would review first three of them in the next slides. Let me talk quickly about CSS shadow parts. So currently, if you use Shadow DOM with your web components, Shadow DOM completely isolates the CSS style sheets that are gonna be applied to the, like, it isolates your component from the page style sheets. So you need, but at some point, you might need to pass some, like, style properties or style values to add theme support to your web component. So depending on where it's appeared, it may look slightly differently. So for example, if it's in a public area, it may have, like, your component may have look A. In like admin area, it may have look B that is a bit different. And now the only capability you have is the CSS variables. And sometimes it may be not enough. So CSS shadow parts will allow us to pass not only properties into the shadow DOM. Right. So moving forward, CSS inside shadow DOM. So this is tightly related to the CSS modules v1 spec. And here is why. So, by the way, who are not really familiar with Shadow DOM? So, okay, so everyone is familiar, right? Okay, let me give a quick introduction, nevertheless. So, Shadow DOM, right? It's kind of it allows you to specify a sub-document of the main, like, DOM document, right? That will be completely isolated from the all CSS style sheets, from the all actions that are performed against the main DOM document, and so on, right? And consequently, since we isolate our, like, fancy component, we need somehow to inject the necessary CSS here, right? To make it look great, right? And there is an issue with that nowadays. So there are two main ways of doing this. First of all, this is exactly the CSS modules v1 spec. The other name would be constructible style sheets that are already implemented in Chrome. And the other way would be to use inline style tag, or use link with base 64 link inside. So it may sound really awkward for you, right? Why can I use just link element and, like, use reference to external document? Because in that case, you would have flickering. So your element will be rendered first. After that, browser will discover that link tag. will send a request to your server to load the CSS file, but element is already like shown to the will be already shown to the user, right? And to overcome this, you need to keep all your style sheets inside GS bundle for your web component. And there is the other side of the question, and the other side would be performance. So from the tests that I did, there is some performance hit in this paradise. So here there are like the most like popular phones from the mostly mid to low range, because those devices are like the less performant. With the laptops and PCs, you won't have such an issue. Like everything goes really well here, but for mobile devices, there are performance hit of about 60% of the rendering time. The tests were done at 2,000 web components on a page, and every instance of the web component were containing 8 kilobytes of the CSS. That's quite a lot. This is a corner case. But just to give you an understanding what kind of price you need to pay. But while it may look not really good here, it looks quite okay here. So this is the same results, but here you can see, so this is the time scale, right? And this is the number of devices. And as you can see, like blue lines represent web components here, while red one, it's just a light DOM. It's just like 2,000 buttons, I think, here. So most of the devices, and this is like the same result for web components and regular DOM, can handle this task in about like 600 milliseconds. So the only difference you would really have is between 0 and 50. So much less devices can handle rendering below 50 milliseconds. And there are some devices, unfortunately, that can only handle rendering of the web components in more than a second. But fortunately or unfortunately, those devices, they are only Android devices, and they are very cheap. And good fact for iPhone users is that iPhone 6s is better than the top Android phone I was able to find. So this is about like the optimization of the performance in Safari. So, and I think that's why it uses less battery. So moving forward, summing up, what should we do, right? So first rule, include only CSS your component really needs, right? So 8 kilobytes of CSS in your web component, that's a bad practice. So get rid of the principle where we are taking all the CSS rules we have for the whole website and building them into one single file, and that file will be included into every component. That's bad. That's going to be like not very performant. Like try to like segregate your rules and apply only necessary ones. The next point is that keep your JavaScript in a JavaScript bundle. It may sound weird, but nowadays this is the only way to go to be sure that you won't have flickering of the unstyled content. And use constructible style sheets if available. For Firefox, use link with CSS file represented as blob link, because this is the most optimal solution for Firefox. And for WebKit, use just inline CSS. Hopefully, like for example, lit element will do it automatically for you. But if you're writing them manually, just be aware. So the next point is server-side rendering. So if I have server-side rendering in my app and I want to use web components, what should I do, right? So this is a tricky question. So it's theoretically possible. Like, first of all, it's possible, right? If you have your app that is going to be rendered on a server, just use your web components and everything will go well. If you don't want to render Shadow DOM on a server, but if you want to render your Shadow DOM on a server, there are some issues. So I didn't find any production-ready instruments to do this. While it's in theory it's available, there are some tools that allow you to do this, but I wouldn't say that they are production-ready. So what should I do then, right? If I still want to do this, if my boss says to me, okay, we are not going to use web components without like server-side rendering support. So you aren't going to need it in most of the cases. Because if you design your components well, crawlers and social media bots and like accessibility tools, they won't, they will not have necessity to see the Shadow DOM to understand the content on a page, right? So here we have two examples of the bad component that hides everything in its Shadow DOM, and here is a good component that keeps everything in a light DOM and includes that component into Shadow DOM through the slots. And you may say, okay, good, this is like a simple example. What should I do with a more complex one? So here is a more complex example. This is an example of the web component that implements tabs UI element. And as you can see, even without looking at the Shadow DOM, we can understand that these are the tabs, right? Because we have role tab on the X tab element, we have role tab panel on the X tab panel element, and those ARIA attributes allow search engines to understand what's going on here and how they should interpret your markup. And by the way, this is like the recommended way from Google. I honestly haven't tested this with other crawlers and bots yet, but like as for the Google, this is like from their website. And this example also from one of the Google developers. So moving forward, if you're like still curious, what about the like non-production ready, right? So you may scan those QR codes. They are for two repositories, one from Stencil and one from Skate. From Stencil is more, I would say, more complex and more, it's closer to, much closer to production than Skate.js. They will actually allow you to render the Shadow DOM of your web components on a server. So how it happens? So what you need to do, you need to perform regular server-side rendering of your application, get that HTML code, that render function returned, and send that HTML markup to the web components renderer, so they can do their own their own thing, and give you now, after that second stage, you will have like an expanded Shadow DOM. But there is nowadays no way to represent Shadow DOM root in HTML. So what those guys do, they have custom element called like my Shadow DOM, which is a regular HTML element, and they at the client side they perform hydration, and they like during the hydration they would convert like all the light DOM they generated into like properly initiated Shadow DOM elements. Quite tricky code, especially in Stencil, and actually very simple for Skate.js. Check them out. It's like really interesting technology. Moving forward, versioning. So there are some issues with versioning. Hopefully, that's not going to be an issue for you guys in most of the cases, especially if you have just single app on the front end, and you don't need to run like two versions of buttons or two versions of input on the same page, because there is no way to do this nowadays. Why? The answer is simple. because browser interprets web components like as it interprets native HTML5 elements, and the only like identifiers that they have nowadays is in tag name. So like if you have like buttons version 1 and buttons version 2, but they register the same button tag in a registry, right? Browser cannot really determine this, like what other version it should use. So, but if you really need this, you can do the following, which is like dirty hack. So, like first of all, the first approach would be like do as browsers do, never do breaking changes, which is not really comfortable for most of the teams and the companies. And the second approach use tag-based versioning. So you may, for example, instead of having X button and two versions of it, use X button v1, X button v2. So browser would understand what the version should be used now to upgrade this web component. Okay, and by the way, there are specs that come in called namespace custom registry, and that spec would allow us to like scope the registry of the web components to a particular part of the page. So we will be able to register two versions of the same element at once and use them on the different parts of the page. Summing up, right, what do we have? So as for the browser support, it's quite good. So like the only browsers that are really like aside of the road is an Edge and Internet Explorer. Hopefully their like global usage is not so big nowadays. So for some of you it might be okay. And if you don't want to use Shadow DOM, you may even use just custom elements, and I think that they will work in Edge. So the next point is framework compatibility. It's quite good, except of the React, and the issues there can be quite easily overcome. Serverside and SEO. So it's non-trivial, unfortunately. So there are coming spec that will allow us, hopefully, to declare a root of the Shadow DOM in HTML document. So it would simplify the process. And there are at least guys from Skate.js really like targeted on that spec. So there are some work that is happening, as far as I know. So, but like, nowadays we can use an approach where we just render light DOM and let crawlers to interpret that light DOM using ARIA tags to understand the semantical meaning of the content. So the next point would be styling. So styling is like, it's good. It may be tricky. Of course there are like, it's different. You cannot just like start writing web components without actually like understanding how the styling of the web components works. You need to let your team to go through the like educational materials to understand what is the proper way, how to break down your styles so they would be now per component and so on, and how should you how to change the approach to writing the styles in a way that you wouldn't only write just one set of styles, but you would also understand that, okay, those styles will be used in a shadow DOM of these components. These styles are for the page itself, and like these styles are for the shadow DOM, but they would impact the slot content. As for the accessibility, it's very good. If you're doing accessibility now, just continue doing what you're doing. So no major changes here, like just use ARIA tags. And that's it. There are some examples of how to write accessible web components from Google. There's going to be a link at the end of the slides. So check it out. Hope you won't find any issues there. Versioning is tricky, but it's not for everyone. And for those who already work on a big projects are already tricky. So like, it's as tricky as usual. And as for delivery, like no major changes here. You would just have like another build of the web components alongside of the app itself. Solution of choice, choose your own. I would recommend to start from the lit element, because this is very simple library, although it's very like feature rich. It allows you to do most of the things you would need. And like integration process, it depends on your own context. So, and I have like the last bonus point, like one more thing as in Apple presentations. Don't try to get rid of your frameworks, right? So web components, they are not designed to be a replacement of your nowadays favorite framework. So don't try to replace Vue or React or Svelte or any other framework you use nowadays, or Ember. Because frameworks are designed to help you to build an applications. Web components are designed to allow you to build universal UI elements. So like they are beneath, like they are on a lower level of the abstraction, right? So they have just different goals. And like the use cases for the web components, I found like personally, is first of all, it's is to power your design system or your pattern library implementation, especially if you need to use that library with multiple frameworks or multiple technologies or without framework at all, or on different devices. And another use case would be if you want to create your next generation framework, you can use web components as a foundation for it. So for example, Google did the same with their AMP framework. They use custom elements there without Shadow DOM, but nevertheless, you can call it web components. And Ionic did the same. I think they report about like 30% of the speed increase comparing to their previous solutions that was on Angular. So it may work if you work on a next gen framework. And bring your own case if you have it, type it in a chat. So like would be very interesting to hear additional use cases to the web components. And thank you all. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure if we have time for questions. We don't have time for questions. So